started here, so if everybody could get a seat, we can get going. But before we get going, I'm going to ask our hostess here to say a few words.
You gotta speak right in.
Put it down.
Good morning. I'm Gail Hurd, and I'd like to welcome you to the Weybridge Congregational Church. You're welcome to come back on Sundays at 10 o'clock. At the far table, we have some not quite voters, but interested citizens here today. Christina Wadsworth in the 5th and 6th grade from the Weybridge Elementary School, and Amy Mason, parent also. So help yourself to refreshments, and I know you've heard this before, but I've been asked to repeat the old adage of, to a foreigner, a Yankee is someone from the United States. To someone from the States, a Yankee is a New Englander. To a New Englander, a Yankee is a Vermonter. And to a Vermonter, a Yankee is someone who has pie for breakfast.
Great breakfast, thank you. I'm Charlie Roy, I'm president of Addison County Farm Bureau, and we're here with Jim. We help sponsor these meetings, so they're pretty educational. So we have a few rules. You have 3 minutes to ask a question. 2 to ask a question, 3 minutes to answer, sorry. And then we have the little stoplight, so if you see green, you're ready to go. If you see caution, start to try to wrap things up. And then if we get into the red, please get wrapped up so the next person will have some time. I'm going to ask the legislators first to stand up, introduce themselves, and maybe give a brief talk or something on what's going on, and then we can get in with the questions.
Good morning. My name is Chris Bray. I live in New Haven and serve in the Senate along with Senator Claire Ayer. In the Senate, we serve on 2 committees, a morning and afternoon committee. In the morning, I chair Natural Resources and Energy. In the afternoon, I'm on the Education Committee. We've done a lot of work this session on clean water, that are major bills over in the House, and we've received a lot of bills on environmental issues that have come over from the House to our committee. We have, although the session won't end for roughly another 4 or 5 weeks, morning committees in the Senate closed down early in order to allow the 2 money committees to work all day long. So we're entering the end of the session sprint. We have about another 2 weeks of regular morning committees, and I have about 16 bills on the wall. So it's going to be very busy next few weeks.
Good morning, I'm Peter Collin from Cornwall. I'm a member of the House, and I represent Cornwall, Leicester, Salisbury, Ripton, Goshen, and Hancock. I sit on the House Education Committee, so therefore it's great to see school kids here. And if I'm not mistaken, did I see all of you sitting up in the balcony at the State House the other day? No. I wish you'd all given us a big wave. We would have introduced you.
Good morning, I'm Amy Sheldon. I serve on the House Commerce and Economic Development Committee. I represent Middlebury. And let's see, we're picking up bills that have come over from the Senate on blockchain legislation to enable that part of our economy to flourish. People are making it sound like it could be similar to the captive insurance program, where we enabled the legislation, we enabled that industry early on, and we reaped some benefits from that, and there's a hope that we can do the same with the blockchain. We're also looking at regulation of transportation network companies. Those are the Ubers and the Lyfts, and how do we make that work in Vermont? And one more thing that we're working on right now is a consumer protection bill, protecting essentially more low-income folks from credit card debt reclamation issues. That's what's happening in commerce right now.
Good morning.
Go ahead.
I'm Robin Scheid, also from Middlebury. Amy and I have a 2-seat district, and I sit on House Corrections and Institutions Committee. So we do both money and policy. The money part is the institutions. We do what's called the capital bill, which is all the money that the state borrows for anything, whether it's clean water projects, underwater preserves in Lake Champlain, capital projects for municipalities and wastewater treatment plants and all kinds of things. So that bill went out a few weeks ago and is over in the Senate and Senate institutions, and so we are working on corrections policies right now. So that's all of our correctional facilities. And we've been doing a lot with regard to mental health issues across the state, including our corrections systems. And we're looking right now at medication-assisted treatment for inmates who come in or acquire abuse disorder.
Good morning, I'm Dave Sharp. I serve as chair of the Education Committee representing Bristol, Lincoln, Starksboro, and Moncton, along with my colleague Fred Baser. I just love coming to this building. 50 years ago, this September 7th, my wife and I got married in this building and we held our reception downstairs. So this is just a wonderful place for me to live.
My name is Fred Baser. Dave and I serve together up in the northeast part of Addison County. And I am on Ways and Means, which is the tax committee, one of the money committees in the House. And our major work was to change all your taxes and how they're assessed from Vermont State. And we tweaked a little bit the way we raise money for education. I brought with me a couple of summary sheets, which I will leave over near the pies. So if you want information before you leave with a little bit of a summary, they will be there.
Thank you. Now, who'd like to get up and start with the first question?
Sorry, preempted my husband. I'm Fran Putnam, and I live in Weybridge, so that's why I'm here today. And I'm so glad to see the school kids here. I want to talk about the $15 minimum wage, which it's working its way very slowly in the House of Representatives. This is a bill that raises the minimum wage over 6 years, so it doesn't just jump to $15, it goes up slowly. A livable wage, which is something different from the minimum wage, a livable wage is defined by the Joint Fiscal Office as being $15.76. So that's what people need to live on. Most minimum wage earners are not children, not teenagers. The average age of a person that is getting minimum wage is 30 years old. $15 an hour would generate $250 million in new income. This money would be spent locally. So people who are on that wage, they go right out and they spend the money. They don't save it or take it out of state. So that would generate income for the state of Vermont, and also taxes. This is a really important point, it also means that the state would not be on the hook for things like food stamps and other kinds of assistance, because when you're making below minimum wage, you cannot support your family. So that means all the taxpayers are paying for that family or that individual to be supported because you can't live on it. So those are all good reasons, I believe, why we should get this minimum wage raised to $15 an hour. And I think over 6 years, that's a slow increase, and I think that makes sense. And I personally would be willing to pay a little bit more for my goods and services if the rest of Vermonters could get a livable wage. Thank you.
Oh, wait. Would someone like to answer her question? Sorry.
So one of the committees I sit on is called the Vermont Poverty Council. And it has distressed me for the last couple of years that most of the witnesses that come before the Vermont Poverty Council are representatives of various helpful programs, housing, food stamps, heating assistance, and so forth. And what they're asking for is more money. And the question that came to me over the last couple of years is, are we in government, is it our responsibility to make poverty more comfortable, or is it our job to help people find pathways out of poverty? Pathways out of poverty is secure housing, good wages, and a good education. And to me, that's where we should be putting our investments. One of the best pieces of the tax bill that we just passed is called the Earned Income Tax Credit. And that's where we help working families on their income tax form with dollars. So whether you're talking about the minimum wage, as Fran Putnam spoke about, the earned energy tax credit, or other means of helping people get out of poverty, I think that's far better pathway for our state and our nation. So we have citizens that have self-respect and pride in their work and contribute to the tax base and the economy of the country. So that is the direction I think we ought to go in. Yes, it will mean fewer federal tax dollars for these kind of nice programs, food stamps and so forth. However, our real goal needs to be helping families get out of poverty.
All right, you can go ahead, Jack.
What's the legislative's rationale behind establishing magazine size of 10 and 15 instead of 5?
Any legislator like to speak about the magazine size?
All right, so in the House, anyway, the debate over magazine size, I think, lasted over 9 hours just on that one issue. And it's a challenging one, as we learned during that time, because there's a lot of reasons for larger magazines, and those have to do with shooting sports, antique guns, being able to transport them in and out of the state if we have a ban on a certain magazine size and you want to participate in a shooting competition and the magazines in that shooting competition are 30. Some guns don't take the smaller magazine size. So I think that what you saw with the numbers that you're talking about was a compromise in that for some shooting sports, a magazine size of 10 or greater is what they require. So we carved out a bunch of exceptions to allow that to happen. But ultimately, magazines for me anyway turned out to be a much more complicated issue than I thought it would be, and I think that what you saw was a compromise.
Thank you.
Figured I'd go next since the topic of guns came up. Thanks, Dylan. I'm Amy Mason. I live here in Weybridge, and I'm here both as a parent and a voter and the chair of the board of Women's Safe, which is a domestic and sexual violence organization that serves Addison County. And I just want to say thank you so much to all of our representatives and the governor and our senators and community members for grappling with a really hard issue. It sounds like it was a lot of hours, a lot of challenges, a lot of hearing passionate debate on both sides. And so I would like to say thank you for that, for having that challenging conversation. It makes me proud to live in a state where we can get through the tough stuff, and I'm sure you're still grappling with it a bit. And just in terms of the domestic violence piece, I really am grateful that things ended up the way that they did, because when there are guns, the more guns there are, the tougher it is in terms of domestic violence. More fatalities. In Vermont, between 1994 and 2016, 58% of all domestic violence-related homicides were committed with firearms. 137 homicides were committed, and 80 of them were committed with firearms. And those figures don't include the use of firearms by abusers. And so I just think it's really important that we keep that in mind. And I really thank you all again and appreciate the tough work that you've been doing.
Thank you. Spence?
I'm Spence Putnam from Weybridge, and I'd like to ask Representative Smith why he voted against S55, I think, because he'd assured us that he was going to vote for it. So I'm interested in what aspect of that he was not able to support.
Yes. What I had told the town at the town meeting was that I supported the 675, I think, was the bill that we tied everything on, and that was included the H422 and the S221, both domestic violence and extreme Which I never said that I would support the S-55, because at the time we were talking, I had no idea what it was. S-55 at the time we had a town meeting was a process by which law enforcement, they'd set up a process where law enforcement people could sell their guns that were in storage after a period of time back to the public, back to, you know, licensed dealers. What was added to that was a whole bunch of measures on supposedly gun safety, background checks, magazine size, bump stocks, increase the age to 21 for purchases. Number one is the background checks. For the most part, we currently need to do that, even though it gave some exemptions for passing guns on to direct family members. But under federal law, there was a, if you knowingly or unknowingly sell a gun to a felon, and that felon uses that gun in an additional felony, there's a 10-year imprisonment and a $250,000 fine, up to. And our bill did, I don't know whether it was $500 or $1,000 in 1 year in prison. And the background checks between individuals are totally unenforceable. Our law enforcement people came in and talked to us and said that it was going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to do that enforcement action or take enforcement action. The magazine size was another one that was very difficult, as Peter just explained. And that one, again, the law enforcement folks told us it was unenforceable because we grandfathered all the existing clips that are out there, and we also allowed additional clips to be sold between now and October 1st. And you can transport it back and forth. We made quite a few exemptions in the bill. Once people understood that there was some conflicts there, you know, especially we mentioned the competition shooting, that 30-round clips are a standard clip that they use in those competitions. There's a lot of folks that travel in and out of state for those competition shooters, so we made an exemption for that. So again, that was pretty much unenforceable. The change of age from 18 to 21, you know, it just made it more difficult for legal gun owners to do it. I have no objection to having everybody take a safer hunting course or a gun safety course in the process, and yet that would also include those that had committed some of these heinous crimes. Every one of the shooters in all these heinous crimes, with the exception of the one down in Newtown, Connecticut, all went through a background check. They all bought their guns legally, so we didn't change anything. What we did is we created animosity between one part of our society and the other, when we should be sitting down talking about what has happened, what is going on in our society to create these kind of events in the first place. And hopefully we haven't missed that opportunity completely, but we still need to have that conversation. We need to have the conversation about what is changing in our society to create these kind of activities to take place. And I know there's plenty of thought gone into that. We passed a resolution in the House last week that basically asked the governor to set up a task force to look at what impact some of these violent video games and electronic media had on creating some of these. I don't know whether there's any connection or not, but that's one of the conversations we need to have. There's a lot of things that we need to really sit down and think about as to how and why things happen in the way they are before we're going to achieve the goal of making our schools and communities safer.
Thank you.
Mark Bolton, Addison. I have a farm in Addison, and a few years ago I heard somebody fire 8 shots in 10 seconds during the deer season. So I went around to all the hunters and I said, nobody can aim that quickly. They're just blasting away. The Marine Corps has a policy when for their soldiers, for their Marines, that when it's on full automatic, you fire no more than 3 shots on automatic, because you can't aim. So this argument on the clips and the size of the guns, I think, is superfluous. What we're missing is the basic reason we have the Second Amendment. It's not the 10th Amendment. It's the second, right after the freedom of speech. In Vermont, we celebrate Bennington Battle Day. That was the first time armed civilians defeated the British Army, which led to their ultimate defeat and the creation of our country. The armed citizenry came before the government. And the Second Amendment is a retention by the armed citizenry of their rights that pre-exist the government. The government does not have either the right nor the jurisdiction to take weapons away from the armed citizenry. Now, the government does enlist and conscript people to go into the service. And most of the people in our, quote, professional military are 2 and out, 4 and out, 6 and out. So even though we have a professional military, we have a military force that's drawn from the same population base. And if you set up a system where the government does not trust these people that established our country, then they don't have any basis to trust the government. Trust goes both ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Lois Farnham from Middlebury. I am a native Vermonter, born and brought up here. I'm a former hunter. I no longer hunt because I don't think it's safe, because I don't like people shooting at me. We had 140 acres in Milton. We had a Christmas tree farm. A lot of Christmas trees are sold during hunting season. And we had people up there, we had people that put up deer stands on our property that without permission. So I would like to address the gun issue and the Second Amendment. That was for militia. Okay, people tend to forget the end of that. I was in Florida when they had all of the marches against guns. I was amazed at the number of school children that were there, and since they've been in school, there have been school shootings. I was employed by the school system as a school nurse. We had to do a lot of these lockdowns, and you folks know what I'm talking about. I am not in favor of arming teachers with weapons. I am so impressed with Governor Scott for signing the bill in the legislature, for coming up with these 3 bills. I think that they realized after the incident in Fairhaven that Vermont is not a separate entity, that, you know, it can happen here. And I think that we need to look around. Things have changed in the last 200 years. Trust me. Thank you.
Thank you. Bruce?
We could easily spend, I think if we all stayed here till noon, we wouldn't exhaust this topic. But I just want to follow up on a few things. In terms of the laws passed, none of them they do not disallow, other than existing law that says felons may not buy weapons. The laws don't take guns away from people. They regulate the use of those guns. And I think that's well-established law, supported in Supreme Court cases. So it's not a black or white. You may not have weapons, other than, again, in the case of felons who are not allowed under federal law. And it's a question of regulating how you purchase, how you use, what the features are. And I think it's possible to pick at them and say that there's a problem with each and every single one of the bills we have. But I think given the escalation of violence and how much more dangerous violence is when guns are involved, that it's reasonable for us to start to change the story and start to change the culture. I think I agree with Representative Smith about the other conversation. So these 3 bills passed, they were signed into law, but there is other work going on now to continue to that bigger conversation about why is it that guns have become such a problem when we've had hundreds of years of history when they weren't a problem. So guns are just a tool in a very dangerous situation in some cases. So I'm very glad we took those steps. For those who think that they're going to achieve everything they hope, I'd say they will not. They will be a step in the right direction. For those who worry that it's draconian law that will take many things away from them, I think it will take much less away from people. And we have more work to do, and it will take years more work on it. I also wanted to pause and say I got a letter from a Fairhaven superintendent and school board member and teachers, and it is heartbreaking to read those letters in terms of how upset and worried people are about what might happen at Fairhaven School should Mr. Sawyer, who was arrested as part of the potential shooting down there, is released. And so it's very much a live issue. There's a lot more work to be done. And I think, I think in the end, the part that is encouraging to me is that yes, we can get divided in terms of pro and con on these issues, but I keep seeing Vermonters take the harder route of coming back together, having difficult conversations, and working through it. And I think that's the strength of the community we live in, and I'm going to count on us to keep on doing that.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Chloe Lyons, and I'm a senior at Mount Abraham Union High School. I'm here with my friend Madeline Bernidi. We are 2 out of 3 co-founders of MASA, Mount Abraham Student Activism. Recently, we have really tackled this gun issue head on, and I just wanted to say first and foremost that I completely agree with Senator Bray on the fact that this issue, and along with others, tends to polarize 2 different groups. And I think at the end of the day, everybody wants the same thing. We want to maintain our freedom, and we want to have less casualties by guns. So I want to extend an invitation if you feel like you could contribute to the discussion of gun violence. Madeline and I always love to talk to people that don't necessarily agree with us. If you'd like to come to our group and speak with us, we love having different guest speakers and different perspectives, and we want you to know even if you don't agree with S55, 422, 221, then you can come talk to us and let us know why. Yeah, thank you.
So I just want to commend Chloe and the students at Mount Abe, and the students across the country and the women across the country that have been energized by this conversation. It's wonderful to see young people here from the elementary school. The involvement in the democracy is critically important, whether it's about guns or voting rights or any of the other issues that are before us today as a society. We can't just leave this up to old white men with gray beards. It's really important that youth and women and young people get involved in the political process and get involved in our democracy and help America stay the great country that it is. So I want to thank you, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Do we have anybody else who'd like to step up and ask a question? Go ahead, Mark.
I just want to make the point, don't just leave it to, or reiterate what Representative Sharp said, don't leave it to old white men with beards, but don't blame us for all the problems either. So if you are interested in this or any issue, I advise people to study the issue and not just look at it facially, dig down into the reasons why we have these different things. And I was talking to my brother who lives in Florida, and his expression, he described how uncivil a local meeting was down there where everybody was accusing each other of various crimes, lying, and everything else. The most important thing, if we're going to have a discussion, is to keep it civil and respectful. And that's one thing that I appreciate about coming to these meetings. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
There, maybe, just
This happens every time I get up and talk.
Okay. We'll give them a minute to get out. Thank you for coming.
I did think for a moment I was a standing ovation. Good morning, my name is Lynn Cole. I'm from Weybridge. And as most of you in this room, or a lot of you in this room, know that I'm an educator for 40 years. So I think I'm the one that can make that shift from gun violence in schools, because I know a lot about it. But I would like at this time to shift a little bit, while we have the legislators in the room, to what I consider probably the biggest threat to the economic security of the state of Vermont. And that's, I appreciate the $15 an hour minimum wage, and I appreciate making our schools safe. And I certainly appreciate us all talking like normal human beings. But what I'm really concerned about is the aging workforce, the lack of workforce. I think it threatens every piece of our society. I think it threatens our farms, our manufacturing, our schools. And so I'm wondering, with that big a threat, and I think legislators know that, what is going on, what the legislators feel are the threats, and what kind of avenues can we take to make Vermont a more livable place, an attractive place for young people. Thank you.
Thank you. Can someone light it up, please?
So in terms of the workforce side of things, Vermont has, as you know, a great high school graduation rate, but a much lower rate at which people go on to additional post-secondary training or education. So that could be a trade school, a training program, 2-year, 4-year college, whatever it is. And we know that there are many jobs these days that have an increasingly high percentage of good-paying jobs require some additional training. So one of the things that's going on right now in Senate education is we have half the committee actually serves on economic development as well, and there's a joint committee effort going on to try to improve the connection between high school and additional training so that people, well, there's two pieces. One is high school and additional training, so that people will be ready for the workforce and be able to take positions that actually pay better than minimum wage and do better, have a better tool set of their own in the workplace. At the same time, that post-secondary education, well, you know from the Hannaford Center, there's also opportunities for adults to come in for additional training, and we're looking at, frankly, why it has been, we're seeing some success, but it seems much more limited than anyone would hope for. In other words, that more people who are already in the workforce could come back, get additional training, bring their skill level up, and then earn a higher wage or take new positions that are available. So that is, you know, those are two things that I know about from my own committee work, where I'm seeing opportunities to have a better educated, more skilled, and higher earning workforce. You know, the other thing is, there was very little data for it. So I don't know the whole backstory, but there was a Forbes magazine article 2 weeks ago about where are millennials moving in the United States. And the #1 state for millennials coming into the state is Vermont. So I'm hopeful that many of those folks will either create new businesses or come with good skills and stay in the Vermont workforce.
Thanks for bringing up an issue that we've long talked about when I was in my old job in economic development too. I think that the Forbes article was related to, was it the United Van Lines issue about where people move in? I think that was the one I saw, and where most people move is, according to their data, was to Vermont, which was kind of interesting, or the highest percentage. It was a move-in state. There are a lot of things that are challenging. We have a very low unemployment rate. It's around 2.4%. So we don't have a lot of workforce here to actually draw from for the many jobs that we have. So in fact, if we can get people to come here, that's good. One of the things I heard a lot about for many years in my job running the Addison County Economic Development Corporation was there isn't enough housing. There isn't the right kind of housing, affordable housing, not the technical term, but I sometimes call it starter homes for starter jobs. We simply don't have a lot of the housing. We also have issues with childcare. So we don't have a lot of the supports in place to that would incent people to say, I'd love to move to Vermont because I know I can find a house and I know I can find childcare. The wages we know are good. We hope we're going to get paid family leave, and we have some sick days, so we have some other things that we can offer, that all of which are economic development tools. But if people don't have places that they can live and don't have places for their children to go before they're of school age, then we have a problem that we need to address. Last year we did something with some money to go towards a housing over a period of time with the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. There might be something in there this year, I don't know. Fred might know that, sort of Fred. But we still have the child care issue. So those are some of the issues that we have. People often come to Vermont, this is anecdotal, I don't have data to present to you, but when they have small children, because we have great schools and it's still relatively a safer state than there are other places, but if they don't have housing and they don't have child care, then we have a problem.
Lynn is very accurate in terms of looking into the future and trying to address a serious problem. There's no one silver bullet that can develop the economy more and perhaps have young people look towards staying here. I think to some degree, thinking of myself as a young person, I ended up moving up here when I was early 20s. Young people seem to have a little different thinking about things nowadays. But some of the things I think we can do is include housing, as was stated earlier, job training, which was also mentioned. I'm a supporter of paid family leave. I think making Vermont a more welcoming place for young people is a good thing. I think we also would benefit from our attitudes towards business in the legislature. I think if you ask legislators how they feel about business, they would all say just great and wonderful, but sometimes unintentionally things are done, and businesses that have an adverse effect. And I think sometimes we have to consider that. I know agriculture, from what I gather and speaking to people in the agricultural field, they're a little discouraged at them being pointed at all the time as being the cause for polluting Lake Champlain, when I don't think that's necessarily the case. And I think we should hold our agricultural industry up, and because I think it's one of the greatest industries that we could further develop here and perhaps make people feel good about being in that business. I think sometimes we put too many rules in place and regulations in place, all with good reasons, but sometimes they just kind of create a death by 1,000 cuts to many small businesses, especially. And I think we need to work on our infrastructure. Today we have a computerized world, and many parts of our state don't have cell service. Many parts of our state don't have high-speed internet access, and that puts us at a disadvantage. Difficult thing economically, but I think it's something that we have to continue to work on. It's a big field. It covers many, many different aspects of what we do, and I don't think the state has done a good job putting together some kind of a comprehensive plan that we might be able to continue to follow up on, and encouraging the kids in school, finding out what they like, what they need, working with them to try to learn what would be important in terms of keeping them here is also something that I think would be a good thing.
Thank you. Harvey?
Yes, I think Fred did a really good job of describing some of the issues and how we need to be pretty broad in our thought process in order to solve these issues. And one of the things we need to be careful of, we talked about, Fred mentioned that sometimes the legislature does things that has unintended consequences, and I was thinking of early child care providers. I know right now it's almost impossible to find child care providers for infants, the youngest students going there. And part of that was because we created a system that, with good intentions, but created a lot more paperwork and educational opportunities, and required the single-person child care providers that could have one or maybe two infants at a time to take some time to go to these training courses instead of having some courses online, and maybe they were available online as well, I'm not sure. But anyways, all of a sudden, once that law was passed, we saw a great deal of these private child care providers just shutting their doors because the burden was just too much for them to provide the same kind of services they had before. So that's one issue. Another one, when Fred was talking about agriculture and how sometimes there were unintended consequences for pointing a finger for cleaning up the lake. Well, last week we had a group from Lake Carmine, the farmers up there in Lake Carmine, because they're pointed at more than any other farmer in the state. And Heather Darby from UVM Extension, she does a lot of research and is really incredible about pulling numbers together. They went back and looked at what's happened in that watershed over the last 8 years to see what has been changed. And the agriculture community made some significant changes in the way they operated, the practices that they used. But also, every farm in the state, or at least the large and medium-sized farms, and now the small farms as well, have to come up with a nutrient management plan. And that nutrient management plan requires that everybody does soil testing on their fields every 3 years, and then we monitor them. So they had a chance to go through 3 cycles up there, and the phosphorus is what is causing the biggest share of the algae blooms around the state. And there you'd be surprised at seeing the reductions in the amount of phosphorus that was in the soil today compared to what it was before. They're adding very little, but they're using the reserve phosphorus up as we go. So I don't think people can legitimately criticize the farm community for not caring and not doing the right job, because the numbers that they put together clearly indicate that that's not the case.
So I'd say two of the really big reasons why families move to Vermont is a clean environment and great schools. And we're at war with an administration who doesn't believe in either one of those things. And in particular, I'll talk about education, which is our committee's purview. This is a governor who wants to cut spending on education at a time when we ought to be investing more on career and technical education and more on pre-K education. And it disturbs me greatly, and we are working on a pre-K bill right now to try to fix some of the unintended consequences of the rollout of pre-K, which are quite severe in some communities, and finding ways to fund career and technical education so that we have a more robust use of our career and technical centers. We know we need people moving into the trades, electrical, plumbing, culinary, and so forth, and we are not preparing our students for those trades as well as we could if we invested. Thank you.
Yes.
I just want to say something about childcare regulations. This was my field for 30 years, and I'm retired now from that. But I just want to make sure that everybody realizes that those regulations deal with health and safety above everything else. If the child care provider can't evacuate all the children in his or her care, if there's an emergency, then that's why we have regulations on the number of children that can be in care. I'll just give you one example of something horrible that happened. And I believe this was an unregulated child care. This child, who happens to be my grandson, was mauled in the face by a dog. He has a scar like this on his face to this day. This happened about 4 years ago. His child care provider was not taking care of the children that she was with, and she put them in an unsafe situation. So I know we've had deaths. We had a child recently, in the last 5 years, who drowned in a child care setting. So maybe we should be thinking about how to support, the state should be supporting these child care providers to get more education so they can follow the rules and so we can have affordable child care. No one gets rich doing child care, believe me. So we need to support that. If we want to have decent child care, we need to make it safe and affordable.
One of the threads that's come up is we're talking about agriculture and Vermont's agricultural future. So when I first went to the House, the committee I asked to serve on was agriculture, and when I came to the Senate, I was also serving on agriculture. We were in a period when I first arrived of low milk prices, a lot like right now, although it was I think they stayed low for approximately 2 years, and now we're going on 3 or 4. So, but either way, the dairy industry was very stressed by low milk prices. So the opportunity that I saw then was to start our state's Farm to Plate program, where we focused on looking at not just dairying alone, but dairying within a whole system of different types of food, and how there might be healthy, productive relationships between all those folks in that system. So we're talking about growing a crop, harvesting, processing it into food, getting an organic waste stream, composting, and bringing it all the way back to the farm, a full cycle. And since that time, we have, I wouldn't want to claim Farm to Plate alone is responsible, but it has helped. We have added, the number of farms has increased in the state. The number of manufacturing jobs related in our food system has grown by 6,400, and we've added over $100 million in receipts in business. So there are bright spots in terms of Vermont's food and agricultural future, and I think we continue to look at how to be innovative, creative. 10 years ago, it would have seemed unusual to be talking about vineyards and breweries and people growing grains for breweries or distilleries, the same kind of thing. So our food system is evolving, opportunities are evolving with them, And I remain optimistic that we'll continue to have people creating new spots and innovative businesses to help us keep our ag landscape going. I mean, Addison County is #1 in the state for agriculture, and all these big green beautiful fields around here, they're all working, and I think everyone I know wants to see them keep on working. So I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Matt. Oh,
Sorry, yeah, just give it Harvey when he answers the question. Sorry.
I just wanted to follow up on the comment about our governor and his position on the environment. And we, for the first time in many, many years, have received a report card from EPA that basically gave us I'm going to say a A rate. We passed in everything with the exception of one item, not 2, 3. Anyways, but agriculture received a clean slate all the way through this EPA rating for the things that the agriculture community is currently doing, and that includes what ANR is doing with agriculture, what the Agency of Agriculture is doing in the enforcement and building their goals. And if somebody wanted to see that report, I could probably pull it up. But I just want to say there's a strong commitment there. Funding is constantly going to be a struggle. Chris has been working on proposals for funding of this water quality cleanup on the last year or so. And everybody else has been thinking about it as well. The state treasurer was tasked when we passed the clean water bill to begin with to come up with a variety of different funding sources, and I can't remember how many she came up with, but it was about an arm's length list of ways to fund it. Yeah, and so there was, there's a lot gone into this, but it's kind of challenging to come up with somewhere around $25 million a year of new revenues for funding the cleanup project, and we're just taking some time to make sure that we get it right.
Thank you, Herb. Go ahead, your turn.
Okay, I'm Madeline Bernuti. I'm actually from Lincoln, so I'm kind of in the wrong town right now, but that's okay. So one thing I struggle with, I'm going to go back to minimum wage for a second. For the past 4 years, I've worked at the Lincoln General Store, and apparently it's a law in Vermont that if you are a high school student and you work a part-time job, you don't have to be paid minimum wage, which has been a big struggle for me because for the past 4 years I've been doing the same work as everyone else at the Lincoln General Store and have been paid a lot less. So I just want to know why and if you have an answer to that.
Good question. Don't everybody jump up at once.
So what I know is sort of only what I've heard, and that is that there are in fact a lot of carve-outs within minimum wage. I don't think anything can go below the federal minimum wage, which is a paltry $7.25 an hour. But we have, in addition to I think part-time students, agriculture, family businesses. There's just a whole list of carve-outs that frankly I'm even surprised the store knew about it. Most folks don't know, but there are in fact a lot of carve-outs in minimum wage, and probably a lot of that was done through compromise to enact higher minimum wage than the federal level.
Bob, you look good for wages. Please.
So one thing I know a little bit about, because my wife worked in the restaurant business for quite a number of years, and I believe it goes to the notion of pay differential between women and men. So one of the carve-outs is that waitresses don't have to get minimum wage. And I find that incredibly distressing when we're looking at a society that values women far less than it values men. Overwhelming number of waitresses, that's generally what we call them, wait staff, overwhelming percentage of them are women.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just, back on economic development. Over the last several years, we've talked a lot about that. And we have, as has been mentioned, Vermont people because our quality of life, our quality of our education. But one of the things that we have not been successful in achieving is keeping up with modern times. A lot of Vermont has crappy internet, not just cell phones, but internet. And if we want to change, if we look at the millennials, these are the innovators of the future. These are the people who'll be doing the new businesses, not necessarily the dairy farms or whatever. But what they need to do their businesses is internet connection to connect with the world. And we talk about broadband, but broadband in a term, the way it's used here in Vermont is an empty term. Broadband by federal government is a minimum of 30 megabytes per second. How many people here have 30 megabytes per second? Maybe a few in Middlebury and the people on Comcast. But the rest of us, I mean, I have, quote, broadband, but it's 12, okay? You can't run a modern business out of your home in a small town on 5 or 10 or 12 megabits per second, if you even have that. So I think, even though it's been talked about, there has to be significant priority on getting internet to every part of Vermont. Because then these millennials who want to come to Vermont for the lifestyle, for the education, can do it in the tiny towns and make these small businesses flourish. I think that's probably the most important thing. And we haven't been innovative in looking at how to do this. We need to talk to our power companies. They have power going to every house. There are ways to make this happen if we have a consistent plan that we're willing to put some force behind. Okay, so that's my only point. We need not to forget that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to respond briefly, one of the groups I'm part of is the Rural Working, it's a long acronym, it's a Rural Caucus of Legislators from Rural Areas, and we've been getting well educated on the broadband issue. And just to be clear, by federal law, broadband can't be regulated. Unlike the power company, which is a regulated industry, broadband is unregulated. You can't force broadband companies to provide service, even if that broadband company is your phone company and the phone company is regulated. So all you can really offer are carrots rather than sticks, and carrots mean money. There is a proposal working its way through the Senate right now to increase the universal service fee on your landline phones. It would raise about $5 million a year to help incentivize companies to provide more broadband. It is a new fee, and our governor is opposed to any new taxes or fees, so it probably won't get anywhere. But basically, it's an issue, as all things are, of money.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Excuse me. George Belrose from Weybridge. Another topic, healthcare. I don't see Claire Air here, but I was interested in where her efforts to expand, universal primary care were. Where do things stand in that area?
I can't tell you a lot. It has passed out of the Senate. It was a watered down version of what the senator had put in. I don't know all the details, but it would have gone to House rules, and then is it going to get to healthcare? So I think it may be stuck in House rules at this point.
Is it going anywhere?
I actually don't know whether it will go anywhere this year or not, but I'm not on House rules, so it's still not what it started off being, regardless of where it goes.
This is something I've been following fairly closely for a long time. It is in House Rules Committee. It has been discussed last week in House Health and Education and Welfare. The Senate version that was passed out with that Claire generator was severely cut by Tim Ash, was gutted. That's what passed out of the Senate. The House Education the House Healthcare Committee is looking at that version and the original version. It's an uphill battle. I'm not sure what's going to happen, but that's where it is right now.
Hello, any more questions, or?
I'll talk again, Mark Boven again, if nobody else wants to, on a couple issues. On the regulations, the state has a small office. It's 60% funded by the federal government, 40% by the state of Vermont, PTAP or PTAC or something like that, that helps small businesses negotiate their path through regulations. So that is something that everybody should know about, but it's not advertised or promoted much. The key thing is every time I hear we need something affordable, I hear subsidized. I would like everybody to look up Frederick Bastiat's two essays. One is that which is seen and what is not seen, and the other one is The Broken Window. Basically, he argues that you can't consume what's not produced, and we have to focus on production. The one part of production that, as somebody that has been working on his own since he was 14, that I see, is that we do not have a training programs for lower management positions, and that can make or break a company. And so you can have all these college educations, all this training, but you really need to have somebody in the middle that runs the systems. In the service, they say the senior NCOs run the service, and that's the way it is in business also. We need to focus on that and probably not need much more money.
Thank you.
I'm not commenting on that. I just was sitting here thinking about the minimum wage. The assumption that $15 an hour is something you could live on is ridiculous. If you do the numbers, that's $24,000 a year. And if you live with your parents or something, a single person could probably deal with it by the time you do cars, taxes, health insurance, and so forth. And also housing, you can't find anything for less than $1,000 a month. And the general rule for that is that your housing should be a quarter of what you earn. A quarter of $24,000 is not $12,000. So literally, if you look at the numbers, it just doesn't work. I mean, 15 in 1924 or 2020 or something like that's a long ways away. It ought to be there right now. You do the numbers yourself. Do $20 an hour and you're still pinching it. I know a young gentleman who's 30 who's working at minimum wage and has a family of 4. Impossible. And his wife can't work because they have young children. Once they're in school, she can work, but not before. They can't afford child care either. That's very expensive, as you just talked about a few minutes ago. When you do infant care, it's very expensive. And it should, I mean, literally, it has to be subsidized somehow by somebody, some way, in order to make it affordable. All these things are, I don't know, I'm sitting here listening to all this and thinking some of the assumptions are really poor to start out with. So I just wanted to put that on the record.
Thank you. Yes.
So I'm Heidi Willis from Salisbury, and just I have 2 separate things, I guess. To follow up on that, I think we just need to, if we're thinking about affordable childcare, if we're thinking about minimum or living wage, we just have to think about the structure, our economic structure. If it's left to its own on a kind of laissez-faire regimen, or let loose with laissez-faire, then it tends to be unfair and unjust. And if we are interested in fairness and justice in our country, then we have to understand that it requires some regulation. But that is a huge topic of conversation. I'm just curious on a kind of a little turn. I know that education funding has been an issue, and I'm not sure, I'm not clear. The governor has asked for certain level funding, and there's some maybe $40 million that needs to be clawed back. The numbers don't stay clear in my head, but and my sense is that things are kind of at a standstill, but I'm just wondering what's going on in terms of current education funding, not changing it, but just trying to get the funding there. Thanks, and sorry I'm not clear myself.
So what the House did and is now under consideration in the Senate was move away slightly from property taxes to fund K through 12 education, pre-K through 12 education. And we did that by dedicating sales tax, 100% of the sales tax, a quarter of the rooms and meals tax, and a small surcharge on income tax into the education fund that would reduce most property taxes across the state and fully fund the education fund. The governor has promised to veto that bill, and has repeatedly said somewhere between 30 and 40 million needs to be reduced in K through 12 education. The speculation in our committee by one of our Republican committee members is that the only tool he has left in his toolbox to accomplish his goals is to take next year's money away. So I think we can expect something like a cut in the education fund of $30 or $40 million. That will completely deplete the reserves and deficit spend in the education fund, and then next year's budgets and taxes will have to take care of that problem. That's sort of similar to what we did this year, sort of put things on the credit card and force the next year's payment of the problem. Because what we did last year was we spent about $46 million of one-time money to actually reduced property tax rates across the state, homeowner property tax rates across the state by roughly 2.5 cents on the penny rate and an equivalent amount on the income rate. And so by shorting the taxes last year, that creates a problem for this year, and we expect what we expect, and we always get surprises from the governor about this time of year. What we expect is some sort of pushing the problem into next year by once again using the credit card approach.
Thank you. Peter?
Hi, I'm Peter James. I'm a third-generation farmer here in Weybridge, along with Bill Barnes, who's a farmer in Shoreham. We're here to support the Champlain Valley Water Coalition board. We're both board directors, and I just want to tell you a little about what we're working on. We farmers are now being asked to put buffers along any waterways. A waterway could be a brook, ditch, where water puddles during the summer, leaving grass year-round all the time. Another thing that we're working at is leachate collection systems, all run off from bunk silos, go into a containment, gets pumped back into the manure pits where it can be spread from April 15th to November 15th, or December 15th actually. No-till cropping, that's another thing. It doesn't work for everybody because of the Addison County heavy soils, but we're trying to implement that here. Less soil erosion, sod stays on the field. And the other thing, of course, that you see around a lot is cover cropping. Those are the green fields that are stuck under the ice right now. And believe it or not, today's April 16th, we should be in the fields. But these are things that farmers are being asked to do, and we're trying to get the word out there and trying to get everybody to do this. And like Harvey said, the EPA did did give us a pretty good grade this year for our contributions to water quality. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bill Barnes, also Addison County dairyman. Just to build on what Peter said, most farmers are pretty positive about the changes we've been asked to make in the last 3 or 4 years. It's a lot to swallow all at once, and we can't do it overnight. I think the phosphorus problem in the lake is probably 150 years old. We're not going to do it, we're not going to cure that today or tomorrow. Harvey mentioned the good report card that EPA gave the Agency of Ag. I think that was mostly based on the policies that they have been able to put in place. It's going to take time for those policies to have any effect on the environment. And I think one of the things that farmers get upset about is the lack of patience on the part of legislators and on the part of the general public. I think that put these rules in effect, that we can obey them right now, and tomorrow everything's going to be cleaned up and good to go. Nature doesn't work quite that fast, and we need a little patience on everybody's part. One thing that we are doing all the things on our farm that Peter mentioned, and most of our neighbors are too. We've done quite a bit of tile drainage. That's another hot button item as far as the news is concerned and the environmentalists. And that also takes time to have effect on the soils, on the crops that come off those fields. We found it very beneficial. We can get in earlier in the spring with less compaction and get out earlier in the fall so we have time to plant these cover crops. So I would just ask the legislators and the public in general to give us time to get these rules to work and to don't expect miracles. Thank you.
Okay.
So I wanted to double back. It is the EPA report card. So what are we talking about? It is that we have a legal agreement with the federal government in the form, it's called the Lake Champlain TMDL, Total Maximum Daily Load. It's basically a cleanup plan for Lake Champlain, and it will run for, nominally it's 20 years, but we know it's really, in perpetuity, we'll be working on water quality issues in the state. And we do get a check-in with them. We have things we need to deliver, milestones we need to make. The three pieces that we're missing on, one was a municipal general roads permit. So I bring that one up just to make sure people understand that our cleanup plans are comprehensive. So we look at forestry and farmland, we look at municipal land, we look at roads, you look at developed land like shopping plazas, you name it. It's really an all-in bill and an all-in legal commitment. So the three things that we got a quote-unquote provisional pass on our EPA report card. And the three things that were outstanding were, one, the municipal general roads permit. That's coming up in July, or it was actually a revision to an earlier, sorry, I'm misspeaking. It was a municipal water quality permit that's they're revising it, and the revision is late. Then there's a second piece is related to 3 acres of impervious surface at any one facility. All that could either be a parking lot or it could be a roof. But the ideal is when rain comes down, it just soaks into the ground. When you have impervious surface, there's runoff, and that does two things. One, you start sending lots of water off a property, and that can cause streams and all, as everyone knows, to swell, and then they start tearing out stream banks, and you get erosion problems that go with it. So that needs to be managed. And then the third thing, the major thing that the EPA report card focused on was that we have to have identified a long-term sustainable funding program for our water quality work. And frankly, so far it's been ad hoc. And what we've been wrestling with in the legislature this year is to come up with a way of creating a long-term funding plan. The Senate's version passed unanimously was S260. It looked at the coming year and said we are very well funded. It's the highest level of funding, the broadest and deepest program we've ever had in the state's history for FY19, the fiscal year that starts in July. But we are looking ahead to fiscal year 20, and we could see that we were going to be roughly $17 million short. So we proposed creating a new revenue stream, working it all out in the form of draft legislation so that next year when we get back, we would have a head start. The governor sent a letter over and listed that as one of the bills that would be proposed. He would likely veto, because it was discussing a possible new revenue stream. So where we go, I'm not sure. The House has different ideas on raising that money, and in the next month we'll be sorting that out. House and Senate have very different versions. The last I heard, they were proposing a rooms tax of $2 an evening on any room taken in the state of Vermont. One of the advantages touted for that was that visitors would pay that, and although I'm sure that we will all appreciate others helping us clean up the waterways in Vermont, the problem, I think, really originates with us, and I hope that we will ask ourselves to contribute to the funding necessary before we just look outside of the state to have others pay for it.
Thank you. We're nearing the end of our time here. I'd like to thank everybody again for coming. Next Monday morning, it's going to be at the Congregational Church in New Haven, Vermont. So I look forward to seeing you all there. And thank you for coming. And we have a donation jar in the back that helps us keep this going every week. Thank you again.
Oh,